Gentlemen, welcome both of you to this podcast. This is FunnelStory Podcast. We are focused on talking about the great profession of sales engineering and the great things that you guys do. So I have two guests today, Paul Steen and James Still. So why don't we actually start with the introductions by each one of you telling us about yourself. Let's start with Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Alok. So good to be with you here and chatting with you, and good to be catching up with my old friend Jim on this as well. So yeah, my name is Paul Steen. I'm a sales engineer. I have been for most of my career at a number of different companies. I've worked as a sales engineer, carrying a bag, so to speak, and looking after customers in the field. And I've also held various positions all the way up the org chart, managing large and global organizations of sales engineers. So fairly passionate about that position. I'm working as a sales engineer today and still enjoy it.
Awesome. James, tell us about your background.
Look, I really wanted to figure out what I wanted to do, and I had a degree from business school at Tulane, but really didn't know what I wanted to do, and had a friend who is a dear friend to this day that worked at a company called Computer Associates, and he said, "Look, you've got to talk to us. It's an interesting place. We're selling mainframe software." So interviewed and spent a little time talking to a lot of people at the company, and decided to go into sales. And from there, it's history, right? I spent about 4 years as an individual contributor there. A lot of great sales training from folks that were, well seasoned, had been in the business already for 10 to 15 years. And their level of enablement was amazing. So that helped me quite a bit. The opportunities to lead and manage and coach a team, I think, were much more attractive to me. So I moved on, and at each and every company that I've served, it wasn't, it was about 5 or 6 total. We had successful outcomes. Privately held company that was ranked number 3 in the Inc. 500 top growing companies. Rogue Wave Software, an IPO. Verity acquired by Autonomy acquired by HP, Coverity acquired by Synopsys. That's kind of the gist of it. And a lot of it, the genesis of it, I think, was built on our sales teams and how well they did. So
you have been in application security for some time, apart from being in sales. So that's kind of a long career, and we'll talk more about that. But I want to go back to Paul. Paul, how did you get started in sales engineering? You had a long career here. So was it accidental? Was it something that you picked up as you went along? What got you motivated? Like, where you got stuck to that sales engineering career? How did that happen?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll go back to the beginning. My training in college and university was all in education. And so I came out of university and immediately went into teaching high school. So I taught high school for 8 years, and I really enjoyed. I did not enjoy scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, working extra jobs in the summertime to try to make up the difference, that sort of thing. And so after 8 years of teaching high school, I figured I'd paid my debt to society, and I was ready to go earn a living. And so this is in the mid to late 90s, and IT was was a new thing. And everybody, there were a lot of jobs and a lot of opportunity in technology, and I was super interested in that. And so, started looking for work in that area and was able to get a job teaching at a tech school that was helping adults break into the technology fields. And that paid a lot better than teaching high school did, but it still didn't pay that well. And then I discovered that a lot of my students were walking out of my classes and into really well-paying tech jobs. And particularly, there was a little security company, a little firewall company called Checkpoint that opened a tech support center in Dallas, where I lived, and started hiring anybody who could spell TCP/IP for their tech support center. And all of my students were walking over there and walking into good paying jobs. And I thought, wait a minute, I could probably go get a job over there. And I did. And so I went to Checkpoint, started as a tech support engineer, working the night shift and weekends. And it took me all of about a month to figure out that sales was where you really wanted to be. And so I immediately started asking around, saying, how do I go about transferring over to becoming a sales engineer? And pretty much everybody laughed at me and said, no, you don't get there from here. But I just, really had set my mind on that. And it took me about 4 years, lots of different types of jobs, tech support, as a company trainer, corporate trainer, professional services, consulting, but all of it with a goal towards getting onto the sales team as a sales engineer. I like the technology, and I am a technologist. I like learning new technologies and that sort of thing. But I also like people, and I like talking with people, and I like visiting with people, and I like the teaching aspect of it. And so once I worked out that all of that came together in the sales engineer role, I was focused in that direction and spent several years working that direction. And once I landed a position after being turned down, I think I was turned down for sales for an SE position 4 times, and eventually got one at Checkpoint and was off to the races from there.
Just to add to Paul's point, I always felt, which is why he's such a great SE and SE leader, I always felt that educational or that DNA, whether it was in sales or sales engineering, just led to a lot of success. Anyone that I've worked with or who's been on my staffs who, I started my career as a teacher. It just, for some reason, they do extremely well in these roles.
Paul, what does the sales engineer do, and why they are so crucial for generally the sales enterprise, and why was James so interested in what you do and helping out his team?
Well, yeah. So what does a sales engineer do? Well, in technology sales, a sales engineer really has probably 2 main roles or responsibilities. One is to take very complex technology and make it simple for customers, make it simple to understand, make it simple to run, make it simple to deploy, to really frame the technology and the solutions in a way that customers will have confidence that it's something that they can use and that they can deploy and that they can run and get a return on their investment. Now, the second thing that sales engineers are responsible for doing is proving out the technology. And so typically customers, once they've been somewhat convinced that the technology, that the solution is going to be beneficial to them, is going to be something that is going to give them a return on investment, that is going to deliver for the business, well then, just prior to filling out a PO and sending us $1 million, they want to be sure that it's going to work. And so typically these are responsible for deploying the software and hardware, whatever it might be, to getting it up and running and proving out the technology. And oftentimes that involves proving out the technology in the customer's environment. And then it's just it's cycling back around to roll and step number one, which is make that whole process look easy and understandable. And to Jim's point, I think that's where the teaching comes into play. It's really helping customers feel good about the technology and their level of understanding of that technology.
So I have come across, very interestingly, a lot of folks who outside of the B2B sales industry do not know a lot about the sales engineering role. They know a lot about sales role, but they don't know a lot about sales engineering role, although I think Jim say that this is one of the roles that we pay top dollars for. Why that is the case? I mean, why? And I also will add to this. There's a question that I was meaning to ask. For the same reason, I found out that a lot of people do not create a lot of tools to help sales engineer. And Paul, I know that's a pet peeve of yours. So let's start with Jim first. Jim, why do you think the sales engineer role is so valued inside the industry, inside the technical sales team, but it is not so much known outside of the normal sales teams? Why that's the case?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? I mean, because they really, SEs are the unsung heroes of this whole game here. And one of the things I think, that to Paul's point was, where does an SE's role begin and where does it end? Because SE's time can be just consumed 24/7, especially in conducting things that maybe they really shouldn't be spending their time with, like a first time sales call or a demo. Some of my best salespeople, they never brought an SE on their first call, right? They didn't want that call to turn into a deeply technical conversation, right? So, but you're right, it is not a widely publicized role, right? I think it gets lumped into sales and selling, right? And I actually think that within our university systems and schools and things like that the SE role should be much more widely broadcast and promoted because it has that, or there's this aura of, I don't like salespeople. I don't want to be around salespeople. I don't want to be a salesperson, because they're still perceived as being the Herb Tarlicks of the world. And I'm definitely dating myself with Herb Tarlick. But that's it. When in fact, SEs, play an amazingly strategic role in the generation of revenue.
When Jim and I worked together at Imperva, one of the things that that I've always thought was made Imperva such a good place for SEs to be is really, as SEs look for a couple of things, and probably top of the list things that SEs are looking for is SEs want to be respected for their knowledge and their expertise. And we're wired a little differently than sales reps. If we were more motivated by the money, well, we'd all be sales reps then.
Right.
But we're a little bit more motivated by simple praise and acknowledgement of our expertise, intelligence, that sort of thing. And so working for an organization where the product is sufficiently technical that even talented sales reps are going to struggle to share the value, to get across the value and explain how this solution is going to solve their problems. That's a good place for SEs to be. We are valuable, which means that we tend to be held in high esteem, and that's what gets us going in the morning. And we like that kind of place to be able to work. I have, in my role as an SE leader, I've had the opportunity to hire nearly 50 SEs over my career. And I've hired SEs away from other companies where SEs are really considered more like tech support for the sales organization. SEs sit in cubicles in an office somewhere, and when a rep gets stumped in a meeting, we'll pick up the phone and call and just whoever answers the phone, we'll try to jump in and help them out. And that's not an interesting place for an SE to be. The SEs that I've been privileged to work with and privileged to hire really appreciate working closely with the sales organization, with sales reps, to be considered part of the sales organization. And to Jim's point, if you'd have talked to me back when I was in college, say, you're going to go work in sales, I just said, listen, I will do any job you want, not sales. I will not go into sales. I couldn't imagine anything worse. But there's a lot of misconceptions around sales, and once I had the opportunity to get into it, but working for good companies, where sales engineers are considered a valuable part of the sales team, working very closely with sales reps, that is a very, very fun and very rewarding career.
They're risk averse, right? I mean, SEs are risk averse, which is why they're not in sales, right? They don't want to carry a quota. They see
Right.
that as something that's a risk, right? I can lose my job if I don't hit my quota. But that quality also, helps them translate the value of proving out a solution, right? They've always, what I've always gotten out of them was just, yeah, hey, Jim, we knocked it out of the park, with the technical side of this, but, I don't know if what we're doing here is really delivering the value that the customer sees, in this price point on the proposal, right? I don't know.
Jim, I want to hold your thoughts. I wanted to hold your thought because a couple of points I wanted to make, and I want to come back to this.
Yeah.
I have, as a product manager, I think I'm also privileged to work with great SEs like Paul and many others. And it has been like almost a decade, last decade, that I have been sitting into the what is called the POC review calls as a product manager. Was invited to many of them, sitting there just to listening to how a trial is going on. And you said, Jim, very interestingly, that these are risk averse. They are focused on something which is more of kind of showing value. The questions that are asked in those sales trial review calls are largely about how this trial is going on. Does it, how it is going good or it is going bad? And I have always seen kind of a contorted face on the side of the sales engineers, because this is not their skill set. To basically say whether this will close or not close, they are doing their job. They are calling the strikes as they are seeing it. But moving them into a prediction territory where they don't have all the data, all the source, it has been kind of unfair to them. And what happens usually is that I will be watching them in the start of a quarter. They will say that trial is going good, trial is not going good, whatever they feel like, in a sine wave between cautious optimism to cautious pessimism. And then suddenly at the end of the quarter, all hell will break loose, all dominoes will fall. And then everybody is kind of scratching their head and saying, why didn't you know early about it? So there are 2 or 3 questions. First is, if that is such a critical role, how, and Paul, first to you, is that how do you have perceived, is this a fair question to ask to sales engineers? And if it is, then how do sales engineers even process this? And then Jim, to you, that from your perspective, do you empathize with the sales engineer situation, that for asking them to kind of understand that how a trial is going on is not it's not a simple question to ask, and how did you use to handle those things? So let's start with Paul first and then Jim.
It's a very interesting topic. As Jim mentioned, sales engineers are very risk averse. That's why we're sales engineers and not sales reps. The primary reason. And so we like to stay away from the forecasting. We like to stay away from pricing, price discussions, contract discussions, any of those things. At various times in my career, I've said things like, look, don't talk to me about pricing. Don't talk to me about forecasting. It's not my job. It's not my role here. As I've, spent a lot of time in this career and have gotten a bit older and have been privileged to work with some really, really good reps over the years, I've become more and more comfortable being part of that process. And to where, in fact, at the moment, I'm working with a couple of young reps that are fairly new in the business. They're very good. They're working very hard. We've already been quite successful together, but they're constantly asking me what my thoughts are on the forecast. Where do you think the status is on this opportunity? And I'm happy to weigh in on the question. But the other thing is that as SEs, in our role of, A, proving out the technology, and B, explaining the technology and making it simple for the customer, we get very, very focused on those tasks and lose sight of where the deal is. I'm not involved in, it's easy to lose sight of the selling part and just, be deep into the weeds in the technology. And, one thing to think about here is that as I've been, working with SEs for a number of years here and hiring SEs and that sort of thing, I can almost put SEs into 2 different categories. You have the SEs with a capital S, which are more focused on the sales side, which understand the sales side of the business. And then you've got SEs with a capital E that really don't understand the sales side at all, but are just ninjas on the keyboard and can make the technology really stand up and dance. And so you oftentimes you need both. I've always considered myself an SE with a capital S, more focused on the sales side. And so I think that side of it comes a bit easier for me, but it's not really a natural place for SEs to be.
So, Jim, how do you help them out? I mean, how do you process their feedback? Like, you have a sales guy and you have a sales engineer working together on an opportunity, and you're asking, of course, the sales engineer, because sales guy is saying it's in the POC stage. I would like to know how the trial is going on so that I can do my forecasting. And you have to do the job of the forecasting for entire North America, the biggest kind of market and where you have to report for a public company.
Yeah.
So how do you balance, how do you weigh out, and how do you process the feedback coming from both ends?
Yeah. So, look, and I think one real important element here is kind of, and I think Paul might have touched on it before, is kind of the transaction size here, right? So, one of the things I always ask, like a CEO or a sales leader or somebody that I'm speaking with, just, what's the average deal size? And what is the average time, the average length of sale, right? From start to beginning, right? And because there are products in the market, right, that move very, very quickly, right? They are, they might be 25,000 in annual run rate, and they close within 30 days, right? I mean, something like we've sold at Imperva, database and web app, some of those transactions are very large, right? And they move a lot more slowly. So, therefore, I think, there's much more of a challenge in the forecasting element of it. So when I take information from an SE about what they're doing on a transaction, on a POC, I have to translate everything into value, right? So, what are my questions that have come back to an SE will be, well, what are the critical business issues that we are solving? Have we been able to demonstrate, how technical prowess on our part, technical superiority on our part translates into business value for the company, right? How does it translate into, the political structure of the company, right? And what's, their religion, right? And their relationships with other companies that we compete with, and what are the business owners, the funders that I would call them, right? The people that fund these projects, what do they have to say about this, right? I mean, you just can't take that feedback from an SE about, well, we're just kicking ass in the POC, and thinking that we're going to win a deal. And I think that's where salespeople, they will get caught up in that, and they can get themselves in a lot of trouble saying, oh my God, Paul, he's the greatest SE on the planet. And Brian and all those other guys yeah, they're so great. They told me we're doing great, so yeah, it's going to close this quarter, big mistake, man, because, really closing a deal at the end of the quarter in Paul's world and in others, right? That where they're big deals and big transactions, I'd say 80% of the time come down to the director of procurement or the head of procurement at an enterprise sitting down with the CIO on the last 2 days of the quarter with a bunch of POs on a table. And I know this sounds old school. And the director of procurement says, what do you want me to do? And what do you want me to pass on? And that CIO will say, do this, kick this out, kick that out, do this, kick that out, right? I mean, so, and it's very, very hard for companies for suppliers to get to the CIO, right? To understand what they're thinking, right? So there's a lot.
So relationships matter. Relationships matter.
Yeah.
So
I've always said, just one last thing. as a sales leader, I always took it on myself as the person to be responsible for the forecast. I did everything I could to kind of shield my sales team, even my sales managers, away from, the wolves, right? And, at the C level, from the forecast, right? It was my responsibility. A lot of times those folks at the C level didn't like hearing it, so they leapfrog over me and talk to my salespeople and sales managers. But that's it. That's it.
One other point I just mentioned very quickly is that the SEs will have more or less visibility into the forecast depending on where the POC falls in the sales cycle. If we are truly using the POC to finalize the deal, to just everything's been agreed to, pricing's been agreed to, the scale has been agreed to, everything is done, and they say, okay, last step, show us that it does what you say it does.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole different situation than oftentimes maybe a young rookie sales rep saying, look, let's just do the POC. Just get a POC in there. We'll sell it to them with the POC. Yeah. Well, that has a whole different, chance of success or lack of success. And, if I'm doing a POC and we haven't talked about pricing or scale or anything like that, I'm so far removed from being able to forecast anything or even help with the forecast. I personally don't like doing those, running those science projects. I'd rather, let's sell the solution. And then when we get down to the end of the process, we can say, all right, everything's agreed to. Now, last step, I'll prove it. And then you send us a PO.
Paul, I have to challenge both of you on this with a very recent scenario. I think we have all seen this. We have a new age of customer, new generation of customer who do not like a lot to talk to the salespeople. I mean, 10 years back, you will have a whining dine, you will have a meeting with them. You love to meet with each other, and you can get a lot from, like what Jim was talking about, building relationships, people. And now you have an entire generation of people who are like what I call mobile app store trained people who will try before buy, who do not want to talk, and who basically get their all information from the internet. And they will say, we will tell you what we like, and we will let you know when we can buy B2C product directly without ever talking. Why not B2B products, right? And the whole concept, and I'm mostly going to, Paul, your point specifically on that. You said that it's hard for you to predict something where product has been tried without any conversations around the rest of the things. And that's what product-led growth movement is. And that is coming very strongly in B2B. I mean, that should become more challenging to entire notion of sales engineering. Like, how do you deal with that?
Look, if you're buying, if you're buying technology solutions that cost $10,000, then fine, take a look, buy it or not buy it. If you're buying solutions that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars, my experience has been the person I'm talking to who says, listen, I know what I'm looking for. Just show me a demo. If it does what I need it to do, then we'll buy it. And I know what I'm looking for. The problem there is that it's not obvious to the customer. They've walked into the dealership, but they don't know. It's not obvious by looking. They don't know if they're at the Toyota dealership or they're at the Ferrari dealership. And if they walked in thinking they're going to buy a Toyota and they walked into the Ferrari dealership, we don't need to do a long test drive and all the other things. Let's first figure out if we're going to, if this makes sense from a business perspective. And so, I've always been one that has been pushing back on, on my sales reps to say, look, let's get some more information. Let's find out if this is the type of solution that is actually going to solve their problem at a price point that they can live with.
I have to just let me ask you a follow-up question on that, Paul. And Jim, I will promise I come back to you. You have a dominant product. You can literally say, we are the Ferraris of this area, and we would like you only if you're in. I mean, I'm not going to trial for everybody. If you are interested in our product, if you like, I will show you the demo. And you can show a public demo. Then if you want to buy, if there is a very specific case, I will do the POC trial and I can walk you with that. Fine. But most of the companies are not that. There are few leaders. Most of them are contenders. Most of the companies are still figuring out. Early stage companies are not even that. They need to do a lot more trials. Do you see kind of a role of sales engineers changing
True.
in the sense of where they are in their growth path?
No, you're exactly correct. And in that I've been doing some consulting for a very young startup recently. Some of my friends are over there, and they're in a position where they're selling a technology that is so new and cutting edge that nobody believes this can be done. And so you have to show it to them. They're not going to believe it. And so they do a lot of POCs right out of the gate. Now the price point is a bit lower. And so it's less likely that price is going to be the problem, the deal breaker. And they need to show the product. They need to do the demos. They need to do the POCs, because they're talking about something that nobody's ever heard of before. And I started at Imperva back in 2006, and we were very much in a similar position where I had to show them the solution. I remember we used to, on the back of my Imperva business card, we had printed on the business card a cross-site scripting string. And I could say, look, I'll show you on your website right now. And I bring up their company website and type in, and I say, here, you do it. Slide my business card across the table and say, type in this string that you find on the back of my business card, and see if I can extract cookies out of your website. And it always worked. And they was, oh my God. And I say, okay, let's talk, because obviously your firewall that you think is protecting you is not doing its job. It doesn't have the visibility into this type of attack. And so, with young companies like that, early stage companies, you just have to show the technology. Here at Imperva, unfortunately, down the road, then we hired some lawyers, and then they made us take that all off of our business cards. But it was fun while it lasted.
Jim, sorry, the same question to you. I mean, how does the product-led growth model will change the nature of sales engineering?
Yeah. So, look, I mean, I think that, let's put it all out on the table, right? You can read, Harvard Business Review, some really good credible publications and, those kind of things, right? HubSpot and, things that they do about, their flywheel model. And, they talk about, how 80% or some high percentage of institutions or enterprises will, conduct all their work necessary to evaluate something, and practically make their decision before they reach out to a supplier, right? You'll hear, 62% or whatever prefer to, talk to their friends and family, those kind of things, right? So, those are forces, against, the the sales organization, right? I mean, it's a very compelling, PLG, Cloudflare is somebody that we competed with at Imperva, right? And I think they did a very, very effective job, in the PLG space, right? I mean, they really, they grabbed a lot of market share with that. And, and there are companies that do very, very well, right? The products have to be built for that, right? You've got to architect and build them in a certain way, and that's not easy. But in that environment, and in that environment where these decisions are all being made up front, and in the product-led growth company, offerings, I think the SEs can play the role of facilitator. I still think that, part of that whole, product-led growth model and that flywheel model, right? I think that there has to be some mentoring, right? Some advocacy, some education that the buyer will find attractive and rely on. I think the SE has a role there. And maybe the majority of that communication is online, right? Or on chat or whatever. But that's a role for an SE. And the other is moving that buyer along to where? The enterprise option, right? So, that's the honeypot, right? The enterprise option. That's where the big deals are. That's where, a company like Atlassian, right? That they only will let their salespeople spend time in those bigger opportunities, right? So, and they've certainly done things right.
So this will basically make changes to a lot of sales engineering processes as we go along. I think there's a lot of things to learn about it, right?
It will, but once you get to a customer that is thinking or considering an enterprise option where they're making a much bigger investment and, they're really, jumping in, the SE salesperson model is it's still going to be there. You need good salespeople to navigate organizations, and you need a good SE to make the company look good, and all that stuff.
Okay, so I think let me kind of summarize with saying that I think there are two models that are going to have one where the sales guys will interact first, sales engineer comes later to close the things. Then the second model where the sales engineer will ensure that the deal is qualified to be handed over to sales. And that's kind of a very interesting way where the sales engineer becomes the lead rather than the guy who comes in later. Mm-hmm. And I think this has been a great conversation. I think I've taken a lot of your valuable time and has fascinating discussion. I think both of you are very, very passionate about what you do. And I think we have not heard the last comments about how this word is going to evolve. So thank you both gentlemen for the time that you gave to me. And this has been a great discussion. I think our audience will love it. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Alok.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Paul. Same here.
Thanks.